Great. Thanks for having me. Thank you, all of you, for sticking around to the very end of the conference. And thank you even more for deciding that what you wanted to do with the end of the conference was come to this talk. So I'll do my best to make it worthwhile to you. And what do I mean by that? Well, when I think of what I want out of a talk, first of all, I think that there should be at least one interesting result. And then second of all, in an ideal world, you could make that result kind of intuitive or maybe even obvious. Now, due to time limitations and also my own personal limitations as a presenter, I think that might be too high of a bar. So at least I'm hoping to satisfy the first of these, so to convince you that there's something interesting there. And I'm happy to talk to you more about it, or you can go and take a look at the draft we have on SSRN. So what am I going to be talking about today? I'm going to be talking about the allocation of affordable housing. And this is motivated by the setting of affordable housing in New York. Now, when most people think of New York, affordable housing is not the first thing that comes to mind. But despite that, there are, in fact, many affordable units being built, at least in absolute terms. So these are units that are generally incentivized by the city through tax breaks, but actually built by private developers. So there were about 7,000 new units built last year. And so they're built by developers, but they're allocated centrally by the city. So there's a website, New York City Housing Connect, where you can go and take a look at developments that are opening soon, where they are, when a deadline to kind of apply for those developments. And so this is what I did when I looked yesterday. There were 8 developments that have applications currently open. I looked a couple of months ago, it was 12 developments. So at any given time, there are a number of developments that you can see on this Housing Connect website. Now, how do they actually decide who gets these spots? It's by lottery. And as you can imagine, the odds are not great. They're not in your favor. So recently, it's been about 1,000 applicants for each space in a development. So put yourself in the shoes of someone who's eligible and interested in having this housing. You know that your odds are terrible. What are you going to do? You're going to apply to pretty much every single lottery you can. Right? And sure enough, there's a lot of people that do that. So here's one quote of someone saying, I was applying anywhere I could. This person actually applied to about 200 lotteries over the course of 3 years. What's the consequence of this? Well, basically, we're just assigning people randomly to stuff, right? So we could have a situation where I'm living and working in Brooklyn, Matt is working in the Bronx. There are developments in both places. We're both entering all of the lotteries. And by dumb luck, we both end up with really long commutes. Right? So we can't necessarily fix the scarcity of housing issue. But at least we'd like to do a good job of, with the housing we do have, can we allocate it more efficiently? So that's going to be the question that motivates this talk. OK, and so I'm going to address that question using a very stylized model. So my goal here is not to capture all of the detailed idiosyncrasies of the New York market or any other particular market, but to try to capture what I think are 3 key features. Right? So one, developments are being built over time at different times, and we don't want to leave a development empty for a long period of time. Right? So we want to allocate it as soon as it's built and ready. Second of all, each agent is only looking for one apartment. And third, we're not just letting the person with the most money be the person who gets these developments. Right? So those are going to be the 3 key features of the model that I'm going to present. So here's the model. So we've got time, and it's going to be discrete. So we're going to have discrete periods. And in each period, we have a set of agents arriving and a new development that is also being constructed. It's going to be a continuum model. So I'm going to assume that there's a mass 1 of agents that arrive. And the development has space for a mass mu of them, where mu is less than 1. OK, so that happens in each period. Now, we're going to have some matching mechanism, say, in this first period, that's going to decide who gets the spots in this first development. And each person is going to have a value for each development. So if I assign agent I to development j, they get utility Vij from that assignment. OK? So I'm going to do that in this period. What happens to the poor people who didn't get assigned? Well, most of them are going to go on and wait around for the next development. Right? So they're going to join anyone who arrives in the next period. And now all of these people are going to be competing for the second development there. Now, if that's all we had, right, we just have more and more people building up in this group of people waiting for an apartment. And from a mathematical perspective, that's not a very convenient model to analyze, right? So we're going to assume that, in fact, they stay with some probability delta, and otherwise they're going to leave the market, right? So you can think of this as they become ineligible for some exogenous reason, or they just give up hope and leave, right? And so someone who leaves the market is going to earn a value alpha I, and that's, I'm going to refer to it as their outside option. OK, so people either get matched, stick around, or leave. Now we have to do an assignment in this next period. And we, again, have these three groups. And this just continues. Right? So that's the model. And we're basically going to be studying a steady state of this model. What about these values and these outside options? Well, I'm going to assume that the outside options are distributed according to a distribution F. And to keep things simple, I'm going to assume that the values are just drawn IID from another distribution. And that's IID both across agents and across time. Some of these can be relaxed in some ways, but I don't want to focus on that right now. And one key thing here is that both outside options and values are assumed to be privately known by the agent. So I, as a designer, I, as the city, don't necessarily observe how much you like a particular apartment, nor do I observe how much you like your current situation. Right? All I can control is I can control the matching mechanism that I use in each period to decide who gets the development. And after that, it's up to you to use the information you have to decide how to play in this mechanism, and that jointly will then determine who gets what. So that's the basics of the model. I don't think there's much point in continuing the talk if you don't understand the model, so I welcome questions about that. OK, I'm pleasantly surprised, or people are just kind of shy or tired or something. Feel free to stop if you have questions about the model. Yeah? Neither. So time is a separate index. I is the agent. J, I guess you could say J is time, because J is the development. Right? So in each period, we have one development. So J is time, basically. Yeah, Ron.
Why do you need that? Like, why can't you just use the I to go to 0 and the
So you could do that. I mean, there's a bunch of different parameterizations that are essentially equivalent, right? But then we'd essentially be shifting the value distribution by different amounts for different agents. Right? So that would be an equivalent parameterization. But the idea is there are going to be some people who want housing more than others. Right? Some people who are OK with their current situation and others who don't. And there's many ways to kind of identify that. Yeah.
Why is delta kind of fixed and not personalized or dependent on the quality of your outside option? Or,
great. So the math changes if delta is not fixed. I'm happy to talk to you about how it changes offline. It's a good question. OK, so I said what we get to control is the matching mechanism. So what are some candidate matching mechanisms we could use? Well, one thing we could do is just the repeated lottery that they're currently doing. Right? So in each period, I say, hey, I've got a development. Anyone who's interested in this development, join the lottery. I'm going to have a lottery and then decide who wins. The concern with this is that you won't necessarily get people applying to every single development, because if I actually get today's development, then I'm not eligible for future things. But probably you're going to get people applying to a lot of developments. Right? So we want something that ideally would incentivize people to be pickier, basically. One way to do that is we could limit the number of lotteries that you could enter. So we're still going to have a lottery every period, but we keep track of whether you've entered lotteries in the past, and we say you can only enter a limited number in your lifetime. So as one extreme, you can only enter one lottery. Another thing we could do is say, well, we're going to still have a lottery every period, but now we're going to give you an incentive to abstain from today's lottery. In particular, if you don't enter today's lottery, I'll basically give you a ticket that you can use in a future lottery. Right? So if there's something that you're not so thrilled about, it's better than what you currently have, but you'd rather go for something else, right? You can keep your ticket for today's lottery and use that to increase your odds in the future. Or you could say, let's just do away with lotteries entirely. Lots of systems run on wait lists. Let's have a wait list. Right? So you come in, you put your name on the list, you gradually work your way up the list, eventually I make you an offer, and then there's kind of two different versions of a wait list you could imagine implementing related to what happens if I make you an offer and you say no. Right? So one is, you say no, and I say, well, sorry, you just blew your chance to get something, I'm kicking you out, you can go reapply, join the bottom of the list. The other is I say, okay, you didn't like that, but I'll make you another offer in the future, you can keep your position in line. So these are going to be the 5 candidate mechanisms that we look at in this paper. Questions about those mechanisms? Okay, well, one natural question is, how the heck are we going to evaluate them? Right? What are the relevant metrics that we're interested in? Right, so one is, we're interested in what I'm going to call the outcome, which is basically a full description of what happens in equilibrium for a mechanism, right? So that's for each agent, what is their probability of being matched to something that they value above V, for any value of V. So in other words, for each agent, what is the distribution of match values they might have? Now that's a high-dimensional, complicated thing, so you could imagine boiling it down to some summary statistics, one of which would be the match value. So for each agent, on average, how much do they like the thing that they get in the cases where they do actually get matched? In practice, you could imagine getting at this question by going to people who were assigned and basically surveying them about, how happy are you with your apartment? Does it meet your needs in various ways? Now, one important demographic left out of that survey would be all the people that didn't get matched. Right? So another metric you could use is aggregate welfare, which is just adding up the utility of all agents, matched or otherwise. So these are going to be the match value and aggregate welfare are going to be the 2 metrics that we use to compare the mechanisms that I just listed. Okay, I think that's enough with the preliminaries. I can actually jump to some results. So here are the 5 mechanisms that we're talking about. First result is actually that the repeated lottery is equivalent to the wait list where you lose your spot in line if you say no. Equivalent in the sense that the outcomes, the distribution of what people get, is identical in these 2 mechanisms. So they're currently using a repeated lottery, and this says, well, if you move to a wait list and you kick them out of the wait list if they say no, you're essentially going to get, within this model, you're going to get exactly the same outcomes. So that's not a promising avenue for change. But some of these other things maybe look better. In fact, the second part of this theorem is that the 3 remaining things are also all equivalent to each other. So if you're like me, at least when I saw this, I thought this was interesting and surprising, and I kind of wanted to understand more. So questions that we have now after seeing this: 1, what the heck is going on? Why do these equivalences hold? And 2, okay, so you've just told us these 5 things really boil down to 2 things, but I can still ask how these 2 things compare to each other. Right? I don't have time to kind of fully address either of these questions, let alone both of them, but I'm going to try to hint at both of them. So in terms of the equivalence results, actually there's like a fairly clean set of intuitions explaining why they hold. So I'm going to focus on the equivalence of the 3 mechanisms in green. Let's start by thinking about what happens in a wait list where you get to keep your spot in line. Right? You join, you sit around, you have nothing to do, you're just waiting, you don't hear anything back. Eventually, if you're lucky, someone contacts you and says, hey, you've risen high enough on the list, we've now got a development for you. Okay, and so you think to yourself, okay, should I accept this development or should I hold out for something better? Right? And note that in this model, once I've offered you a development, I'm actually going to offer you every subsequent development. And the reason for this is that because we have a large market, stochasticity isn't a concern. And so we're going to have basically a constant threshold where everyone above a certain spot in the list is going to be offered the development for a given period. So once you've risen above that spot, your position only goes up. You're going to be offered every subsequent development. So now you're just facing an optimal stopping problem. Right? I'm going to be offered every development in the future. How long do I want to wait before I say yes? I'll set some threshold. You can solve for what that threshold is. So that's the situation. Yeah, Richard.
Is that really right? Because maybe other people who refused this development are still above you.
Right. So if you had a small market, you would be concerned about this sort of thing. That today it happened that everyone above me didn't like it, but tomorrow maybe they'll all like it and I won't get the offer. Right? In the large market continuum setting that we're looking at, that's not going to occur. OK, so that's what you do in a waitlist. You wait around for a while, and then you solve this optimal stopping problem. How about in the single entry lottery? Right? So you show up, you have a lottery ticket now, and you can use it whenever you want. And kind of by the same token of this large market phenomenon, there's going to be basically some probability p that your ticket wins when you use it. And that probability p is going to be the same across periods. And so you can reason as follows. You can say, well, when I use my ticket, it will either win or not. I don't know which, but I can't control that. Right? If my ticket's not going to win, then I don't care when I use it. I don't care what I do with it. Right? So I might as well behave as though my ticket is going to win. Well, if my ticket's going to win, then I'm basically in the same situation I was when I was at the top of the wait list. Right? Whenever I see, I'm just solving an optimal stopping problem. Whenever I see something I like, I can get it by putting my ticket in. Right? So even though I'm not at the top of the wait list, there's a chance that my ticket won't win anything at all. In terms of how it affects my behavior, my threshold, I might as well behave as though I were at the top. Yeah? So this is, again, where the large market effect is going to come in. Right? The number of people applying to a given lottery is constant across periods. We don't know who will like this development, but the aggregate amount that people like this development is going to be the same from one period to the next.
You're saying all developments are, in terms of quality, are equivalent, right?
Right, exactly. So, and we can certainly talk about the way these changes. I mean, we're not going to get equivalence in a world with vertical preferences. So that's a consequence of this IID assumption. Yeah.
But in the waitlist mechanism, you need to wait until they start to offer you something.
That's right. Right. So I think what you're highlighting here is just because I may use the same threshold in the second mechanism as I do in the first, doesn't immediately imply that the outcomes are the same, right? Because in the first mechanism, I have to wait around for a while. In the second mechanism, my ticket may not be any good when I use it, right? But it follows through some follow-up arguments that if everyone's using the same threshold in the two mechanisms, then the outcomes will also be the same. But I'll agree that's not obvious just from what I've put up here. OK, and you can use actually the same logic to the ticket-saving lottery. I say, well, I've got a bunch of tickets. I don't know if any of them are any good. Maybe none of them will win when I use them. But if that's the case, then I don't care when I use them. So I might as well assume the best and behave that way. OK, so that's a little bit about the intuition for the equivalence results. The next question is, OK, we've got these two mechanisms. And which one is better? How many minutes do I have, Matt? About over, OK. Well, let's make it very efficient. So the question is, which one is better? The answer is, well, if you're just surveying the people that get assigned, you'd always rather use the single entry lottery. And that's because that's what makes people pickier. And so they're going to be getting things they like more. But that's an incomplete story because we also care about who matches, right? Are we matching the people who most desperately need the housing? And one benefit of a repeated lottery is that suppose we have a situation where Matt is in a good situation. He's not so desperate for housing. If he can find something that's better than his current situation, great. Whereas I'm really desperate. In a repeated lottery, I'm going to enter every single lottery. Matt's only going to enter periodically, so I'm much more likely to match. Once you've given us each one ticket, essentially we're both going to spend our ticket and we're going to match with equal probability. Right? And so that's a benefit of the repeated lottery, is that it allows people to basically signal their desperation. And so now which of these is better is going to depend on a variety of factors in the market. The story gets a bit more complicated, but one thing that is somewhat intuitive is basically if there's more dispersion, if you have a heavy-tailed distribution of outside options, then it's more important to match the right people. So you can look in the paper or talk to me for kind of more details about exactly how these trade-offs work out. But then the point is, OK, we have these insights. Can we apply them? So I would say in a housing context, they're already screening for income, which is presumably designed to be a proxy for desperation or outside option. So we're really more focused, I would say, on making sure people get an apartment that they like. Whereas in other contexts that you might imagine using these mechanisms, for example, discounted tickets to Hamilton, right? Again, the odds are terrible. Actually, about 1,000 to 1 as well, if you enter the Hamilton ticket lottery. And so you could ask, well, should we be using wait lists for Hamilton? And I would say no, because in this context, we're not so worried about making sure people get the right show. I don't care that much whether you go on Wednesday or Thursday. Right? But what I do care about is making sure that investment bankers are not getting $10 tickets to Hamilton. Right? So one way I could do that is force everyone to show their income tax returns. No one wants to deal with that. Right? So this repeated lottery is basically a way to screen out people who we don't want to win these tickets. So I think in this context, that's actually a reasonable way to go. So what do I want you to take home from this? Well, one, these equivalence results, which I think are somewhat surprising. And two, that there is this trade-off between matching the right people and matching them to the right places. And which is more important depends on the context that you're looking in. Thanks. Happy to take any other questions.